Potentially trying to track your roots. You know? It stops at some point, not too far back.
We went down to the beach.
Oh, nice. Oh, no doubt. There's like 6 women. I mean, it's like our great grandmother times 20, you know?
Hell, I was down there for about a
Good to see you guys.
good for you, dude. And I bet the women's one back. We were here for for Thanksgiving, and then we went with another friend, a couple friends that have a 10-year-old daughter, and that's friends with her. For a few nights after. It's like, Lauren, stay away from that place when Daddy's going in. I'll stay up here in the car. So different.
But the lack of support, our students, I teach these big income resources that you can see. I mean, we don't kids. I'm excited. Well, thanks for having me. This is great. It's good to be here. Yeah. Yeah, this is it, huh? Great.
You are now famous.
Yes.
It is, yes.
Great. Yeah.
It is. I was going to ask you. I grew up here, and there are several.
People you know, that's funny.
A lot of my dick manure over here.
Yeah. Of course.
That's his son. Secretary.
Yeah.
But it's a good group. Fun.
Neat. So you grew up here. And do you have kids at all here? Okay. All right.
I
Yeah.
have one.
Okay.
Lauren, she's 10. She's in the 4th grade.
Okay. Nice.
Kelly and I went to Treul High.
I have friends that switched and I love Treul Square. My kids are in a dual language program at Carmel Elementary. So, yes, which I love. And when the pandemic happened, I looked at St. Thomas More, I looked at Duke School, and I looked at Durham Academy, just because I wanted my kids in school. But I couldn't find the dual language stuff, and they were so into that at that point that we just wrote it out. So, yeah, we're still. Yeah, no, you're fine. They're 4 and 6. So, yep. Middle school. Oh, yeah, the youngest was kindergarten, just like. Yeah. So you have my complete understanding. Yeah. That's what we did. We had another family, and we each took 2 days that the kids would be in. Actually, I hired someone to help, like, kind of monitor that spent time with the kids. I know. I mean, some days it's amazing I still have just because of that, right? I mean, it was a real challenge.
Wait, do you want me to see her? Do you want I don't know. Okay.
I didn't bring any gas. So. I know.
Yeah, so how
Yes. We made that connection yesterday on the phone. Yeah, it was really funny. We have been here 16 years. So, yeah, I do feel like it's the longest I've ever lived in. So I do think of myself as a North Carolinian, as Chapel Hill Hotel. Yeah. am really happy with public schools outside of the COVID nonsense.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's been a good place for us.
Hey, Peggy. Peggy, this is
Hi, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen. My age is better than me.
That's good.
I wish I could take credit for that, but old dear departed friend of mine had to say
hang on to it.
I mean, that's I don't know if I'm supposed to laugh at this joke.
I have not seen Joe.
it's kind of, it's one of those dapper things. Depends on what side of the
Fairly. Yeah.
Can I ask what the goose is?
Don't tell him. Are you waiting? Yeah.
Simplified holiday spear.
Somebody would recognize it.
So not necessarily the president.
Right. Yeah. Congratulations.
Yes.
When you, I know you work, I know, so I'll shoot your email and schedule.
Okay.
I want to get that.
Yeah, I got ideas, man.
Yeah. Okay.
I like the shell idea, man.
Got it. Not getting it. Still your award. Yeah.
Hello, Miss Peggy. Happy New Year. Excellent. How about this? Why? What's wrong? You just don't get one place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. She's not. Okay. Can I call? I'll call in. That takes one announcement off my list.
Nobody around.
That takes one announcement off my list. Yeah.
That's right, sir.
Well, are these completely reserved?
Not at all.
All right.
Mike, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. After that football game last night, I thought,
Are you what?
oh, I'm not. Oh, I mean, I am now because they're technically the ACC. Yeah, they just broke the Broadway, and they're not. Right.
There he is.
Sorry.
But if you've ever been to a football game up there, it's an unbelievable.
Yeah.
And are you from Minnesota?
I was born in Minneapolis.
Okay.
Yeah. But then mostly grew up in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or Michigan? Wait, I should know
That's
that.
all right. No, this is a very thorough. I was joking. I need to give these to my undergrads.
Last night.
They may seem more personal. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
I forgot. Okay, that's right. Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids, which is the western side of the state.
Right up the way.
Oh, okay.
But I lived in Minneapolis for 9 years.
Okay. Well, so I went back to Minneapolis for graduate school then.
Oh, did you?
So,
Okay.
yeah, beginning of my life, I did my education.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Minneapolis a lot.
Yeah, I went the opposite. I started out in Michigan as a undergrad and ended up in Mankato, I think, State, and then my grad work at then we moved south. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Trying to find my, I think get my little, I'm used to wearing bulky coats right now.
I know. I'm in the car.
You don't need it for much.
I know.
So what brought you yourself?
Well, McKinsey was recruiting for a healthcare job, and they said it's in the bustling, up-and-coming city in the South. And I thought, that's got to be Atlanta. And we're like, yes. It was checking. And it was great. It was a great town. It was fabulous. Yeah. But spent some time there, and then ended up down in Pinehurst, and I came and joined the executive team at Blue Cross for about 15 years. And Had a ball. Still love it. Been here 30 years. So.
Awesome.
You've been here 30 years now, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, what about you? What about you? How long have you been here?
I've been bringing from receivers, but I've moved about 16. Great. So it's like I've been here 8 years, but I was born and raised.
Yeah, so it kind of feels, yeah.
But you still know folks out there that are 4.5%.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I was on the phone with the industry, some friends out there yesterday. So.
I have family in South Pasadena, and they left their home initially, and now it seems more okay. So they're back at their house, but even there, like trees that have blown over the wind, so their house has like a hole in the roof from trees, even without the fire, and then the smoke issues, of course.
Yeah, it's really sick. Like we talked to a friend yesterday back in Pasadena, and then we go back. It sounds, and then a friend that's kind of far, it's not far away, but in the middle of the ashes, like random fire, you know. So it's like you might have to go back away, then you might not. You might.
Right, the wind makes it really unpredictable. Yeah. That's bad.
Yeah.
So what do you do here?
So I do film and that's what I work on.
That makes sense.
And then here I still do shooting stuff. There's not as much scripted on here, but we're trying to change that.
So is that a lot of travel then?
But not anymore since COVID, because everyone's so used to Zoom.
Right, you can do a
It's
lot
just
of
like a lot
yeah.
of Zoom.
I heard of that documentary. It just came up on. It's about a little town in North Carolina. White. Oh, darn it. I'll figure it out before. But our son's friend from high school here. Hey there. But she went to USC for film.
Okay.
And then she moved back. She does it out of Wilmington.
Okay.
She does documentaries only. And she's looking more for the underprivileged in North Carolina. Just doing it, but it's got picked up. What's the festival in Europe?
Full free.
Yeah. It'll flash out.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love it. Our company sponsors Full Free.
Okay. I'll find out. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Pretty neat, but it tries to bring the political parties together. And they were trying to get minimum wage in North Carolina increased, as well as they had a platform. They've been trying to get the millionaires in North Carolina to pay their fair share. We can't solve the rest of the world. We can focus on North Carolina. But it was a bipartisan approach. Her name is Sarah Sloan. Sarah Sloan, yeah.
Sarah Sloan.
She was the director.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Full Free is obviously huge.
Yeah.
That's part of the shtick.
As an undergrad, I was interested in research.
Yeah.
And I really loved teaching. And so when I figured out I could be a professor, I kind of combined those two things. That felt right. I tried some other things, just didn't love it as much. And did some work in politics in Massachusetts for John Kerry and for Mitt Romney. And that kind of just like moved me aside of politics. And so, yeah, that's sort of it.
When Mitt was going for governor?
Yeah. His education reminded me of that. Yeah.
I keep forgetting sometimes. He and Carrier, from what I understand, good friends.
Yeah, they were bringing more experienced and one of the parties.
One of those days when it was Chip O'Neill and how they would actually talk and they tried to make it look like that.
They did. But you know it's not real. Yeah, it's all
The only thing I thought was real was
Who are you? What are you and I was thinking yesterday, we need to get together and just Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha. For sure, so that's right.
That sounds like someone I would know. Yeah.
That was an early chat.
Her son was a soccer player with my senior. It was comical. Both our boys went to Washington. She ended up there. My son's mom ended up there. And then Holden ended up there.
Schools are going to finish that out 2 hours early.
Did you really?
Like, you'll be fine.
Yeah, they loved it there.
We'll see. We'll see.
How you doing? Good to see you too.
Well, I'm glad you got here. And the snow didn't get here before you, right?
Well, last Sunday I ended up playing the last 3 holes. Oh, asleep. It was fun.
All right, can I get your attention, please? Joe. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first Rotary East Chapel Hill Rotary Club meeting of 2025. I'm Bob Slater, I'm your Sergeant at Arms for today. Do we have Bob? Yes.
Turn it up a little bit.
Turn it up a little bit. Okay. How's that? Okay, thanks. All right. Do we have any guests today? You want to bring a guest? Yes, sir. Pat.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to all. So my guest is Charlotte White. She's the owner of White Space Creative, and hopefully will be a future member.
Fabulous. Any other guests? All right, do we have any visiting Rotarians? No visiting Rotarians, so we'll get launched. So here's the fine basket. Put $1 in the basket, please, if your New Year's resolutions include more involvement in Rotary. If you haven't done your goals for the year, put in $2.
What if you've already quit?
You've already failed on your goals, put in $5. So let's have a blessing, please, real quick. Thank you for this day, for this food, and for each other.
Amen.
So here's our quote for the day. You're young only once, but you can be immature forever. So by all accounts, I'm achieving this as you're going to see today. So how about this quote instead? I want to die young at an old age. What a great goal that is, I think. So this being the first of the year, it's the time to set New Year's resolutions. Studies show that people keep 9% of their resolutions, or 9% of the people keep their resolutions. Another study puts it at 6%, which seems to be more likely than 9%. The two most common resolutions would be what? Pertain to what? Huh?
Lose weight.
Lose weight, health, lose weight, exercise more. What's the other one? What's number 1, actually? Save more. So they pertain to health and wealth. So last Sunday, Meg McLaughlin, the pastor at University Presbyterian Church, preached on a life worth living, finding your life. And she observed that lots of people who have neither health nor wealth live lives worth living, and they do it through love. They give love to all around them. They're not stingy about it. And they impact their world in a great way by giving love. As I think about Rotary, to me, Rotary is love in action, both inwardly and outwardly focused. As we think about the fellowship we have, and then fighting disease, world peace, sanitation, local service projects that benefit the community, Rotary is love. So there you go, we're on the right track. In that spirit, I want to test your knowledge of our founder, Paul Harris. I know all of you have read his autobiography, dog-eared the pages. It's about that thick. So I'm going to ask you questions, and you shout out whether they are true. Here are your choices: true, false, or mostly true. Okay? So here's the, I've got 8 of these. Here we go. Number 1, Paul Harris attended college at Princeton University and became a lawyer, making his business in Chicago. True. No penalty for guessing wrong. Very good. In 1905, Paul founded Rotary for fellowship and mutual helpfulness. At that time, membership was limited to 1 man from each business or profession. True. And the name Rotary came from what? Anybody know? Moving it around. Rotating it from one person's office or place of business to the other. Number 3. The club originally met at the downtown Chicago Sheraton, where the chef introduced a genetically engineered chicken part with no discernible meat whatsoever. False. That's right. Although the fact that Sheraton does have this no meat business, that is true. All right? Harris realized that Rotary needed a greater purpose beyond fellowship and mutual helpfulness. So in 1907, the club initiated its first public service project, the construction of public toilets in Chicago. True. You gotta go, you gotta go. So this transformed Rotary into the United States' first service club. It was the construction of public toilets in Chicago. Here comes the immature part. In 1908, Paul underwent a certain federally funded operation and became Pauline Harris, only to have the operation reversed the following year when he was reminded that the club did not admit women. True. All right. In 1942, the Chicago Club hosted a chili cook-off in the parking lot of Wrigley Field and raised $7.35 net of expenses. False. No idea is a bad idea. All right. Although the Duarte, California admitted women before allowed to do so, including making one public, or president rather, women were formally allowed into Rotary in 1989. Famous women Rotarians include Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Nobel Prize winning Francois Barry, who isolated the AIDS virus, Christine Jones, and Swedish film star Misty Mountains. Mostly true. All right, the last one. East Chapel Hill Rotary Club members are all dedicated, good-looking, above-average people who share a passion for friendship and community service. True. Well done by you. All right. We're going to end with this. An investment banker from New York gets tired of the rat race, and so he purchases a 50-acre spread and moves to Montana. He finds it incredibly beautiful, but very isolated. One day he's out fixing fences, and he notices a lone rider way in the distance. And he continues his work, and as he looks up from time to time, it seems like the rider could be getting closer. And then it's obvious that he is. And before long, a man arrives on a horse with a full-length duster, cowboy hat, the real deal. And the man on the horse says, "Howdy, neighbor, nice to meet you." And after exchanging some pleasantries, the cowboy says, "I've come to invite you to a party at my place tonight." So the banker says, "Well, what kind of party?" "Well, the usual kind, I guess," the cowboy says. "There'll be drinking, lots of drinking. There'll be music and dancing. There'll be card playing and gambling. There'll be cussing and fighting like wildcats. And there'll be plenty of hanky-panky. You can count on that." "Oh boy," thinks the banker, "this is great. I'm going to be going to an authentic Western party." So he says to the cowboy, "Count me in. just one thing, what do I wear? The cowboy replies, well, I reckon it don't matter much, just gonna be you and me.
Thank you, Bob. That's excellent. And if you don't know by now, Bob is in line to be our next secretary, to be in line to be president in a few years. So thank you, Bob. I have one announcement. Is Linda Sanders here? Yeah. Linda, when is our next litter pickup?
It's going to be either the first Saturday or second Saturday of February.
Okay, all right. And I know Tom, thank you, Linda. I know Tom Shea has an announcement about something.
Yeah, okay. You probably saw in the scuttlebutt that there's going to be another recycling event, another electronics recycling event on March 22nd. And it's going to be at Harbor High School with the Interactors, courtesy of David and his daughter. And so it should be, we actually got 2 trucks coming. We're hoping to double last year's stupendous output from all of you and other people in the community, but we're going to need some people to help with this, so we're going to be sending out a sign-up sheet at some point in the next few weeks. So if you have some time on Saturday afternoon, March 22nd, sign up to either carry some stuff or put signs up, things like that. So thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Peggy has a very special presentation.
Although it's not a surprise, but gee, I knew Mr. Jenkins would not miss the opportunity to get the golden goose. So come on up, Mr. Jeff Jenkins, Dr. Jeff. Joe Jenkins. You thought you could come in late enough.
This is a prestigious.
So here's the only guy who could possibly deserve the golden goose for the next year. Our cheerleader, our
I mean, when I got here, the doors were locked. I figured, maybe Peggy would give it to somebody else. Look, I don't really know what exactly the goal is. But I will tell you that I'm not the person that deserves this. You all do. Because what you do for the people at Family House and your enthusiasm, I mean, some of you have even got names like the Salmon Queen. I mean, they're what Lasagna Man. What you guys do really is unique, and it's so appreciated. So I thank you very much for this, whatever it means. Whatever it means.
Just don't throw it away.
No, I got to give it next year. Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank y'all very much.
Joe, that is an illustrious and prestigious award, so be honored. We will. Omar, did you start that?
Yeah.
We need to cobble the history together. So.
You can read the book. It's online. The whole story.
Before I bring Jennifer up here to introduce our speaker, many of y'all know and remember Garner Stoltz was a long member here at East Treul Hill. His wife, Libby, is Libby here? She may not be here, but she gave me permission to read this note that she wrote to us. It says, "Dear Tim and ECH Rotary, I want to thank all of you for so many expressions of sympathy, like cards, emails, attendance at Gardner's funeral service, etc. It means so much to me, and I know it would to him as well. Also, thank you for all the enthusiastic, warm welcomes and help getting in and out that you gave Gardner when he was able to attend Rotary meetings. It was quite an effort to get there, but he wanted to be with you and was determined. Your many expressions of caring were and are supportive and sustaining. Thank you so much, Libby Stoltz." So I wanted to share that. without further ado, I will bring Jennifer up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Red Dog, and Happy New Year to everyone. I'm so happy that the weather held off for us to gather here today and that our speaker was able to rearrange some things with the school closings today to still join us as well. Many of you probably know that last week the 119th Congress was sworn in. And so our speaker today, Sarah Roberts from UNC Chapel Hill, is here to talk about that and addressing some of our conversation around what this Congress and other Congress really are going to think about as we look at our inexperienced Congress people in DC. Sarah Roberts is the faculty director and programs for public discourse and the Bowman and Gordon Gray Distinguished Professor in Political Science at UNC Chapel Hill. You can read more about her here in the bio. And we often hear that today is the most divisive political climate that we have seen in our history. And so we are really honored today to have someone who's going to share with us a little bit more about that, who studied campaigns, elections, has worked with people both like Mitt Romney and John Kerry, and is going to bring her expertise and perspective for us here today. So please welcome Dr. Roberts.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor to be with the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. I will say this audience seems a little bit older than my typical one at UNC. But that being said, I'm super excited to be here, and I was thrilled to see the little bio sheets that you all put together as well. One of the things I do for my students on the first day of classes is sort of a guessing game so they can get to know me a little bit, and this would fit right in. So it was a fun thing to come into today. So yes, I am going to talk to you a little bit about today's United States Congress, of which I am an expert on here at UNC, where I study things such as American democracy, legislative campaigns and elections, primary elections, state legislative elections, and recently have been doing a lot of work on what I've noticed to be a change in the type of people who are making up our legislatures. And this is not just true in the US Congress, which is what I'll be focusing on today, but it's also increasingly the case in our state legislatures as well, that more and more of the people who are running for office and winning office do not have past experience in elective office, right? And what I want to do is think about some of the consequences of that. I will throw some kind of modeling at you and some political science jargon from time to time, but really I'm more interested in the big picture. And toward the end, if you have any questions that are kind of tangentially related to this, I'm happy to take those and have follow-up conversations after. So just a really quick slide here, because I'm going to be talking about expertise of members of Congress. I wanted to give you a little bit of my own expertise in this area. Like I said, I teach courses, including a large introductory course at UNC Chapel Hill, over 400 students on sort of the American founding, American principles, civics, and that's one of my favorite courses to actually teach. But I also do courses on campaigns and elections. I do courses on political parties. I do courses on the US Congress. I have one class that is one of the most popular courses at UNC, which is a model Congress, where students take on the role of a US congressperson and have to act out that role. And I find that particularly inspiring as we think about how to bridge differences in the Congress that we have. If you've gone into a young person's room at some point in recent memory, one of the things they're kind of famous for is being on electronic devices all the time. And in general, I run a classroom that does not allow laptops and does not allow students to be on electronics. But at the very beginning of this class, I do allow them, and I allow them on purpose so I can see what stickers are on the back of their laptops. And those stickers are very revealing about what their political ideology might be, what their partisanship might be, whether or not they are socialists or not, right? You get all kinds of information from the student stickers on their laptops. And what I do with that information is then make sure when I'm assigning them a member of Congress to be in the model Congress, that they're going to be someone totally different than what their inclination would be, right? And this is so effective for teaching them why people might have some of the opinions, some of the beliefs, some of the reasoning, some of the arguments that they come to Congress with, right? That they are representing a district that might be different than the one that the student grew up in, or the one that they're used to in their community, right? So it's a really a great course, and I find it does a lot for teaching our students to bridge differences and think about things from different perspectives. And to that end, in 2020, I became the inaugural director of a program at UNC called the Program for Public Discourse, where we really try to do a lot of that work, right? We showcase effective public discourse through major speaking events, but then we also do smaller-sided opportunities for our students to really dive deeply into contentious issues and think about different perspectives on those issues, et cetera. And then more in the weeds, I'm also a co-editor of a journal, so Legislative Studies Quarterly, which is the premier academic journal in legislative studies throughout the country. So that's where my expertise comes from. Which, how do I move forward? I got it.
I think there's an arrow.
There is an arrow, which I'm touching.
Oh.
And it worked, it got me to this slide.
It wouldn't be a Rotary meeting without a text.
Jeff?
It's gonna get old real fast. Okay, perfect, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so that's my expertise, and why that matters to me is I'm going to make a pretty compelling, what I find to be a compelling argument today, that expertise is really something that's lacking in today's legislatures, particularly focusing on the United States Congress. It used to be the case in political science research that there were sort of these accepted principles that were proven with rigorous studies on who wins campaigns and who performs well in Congress. And a lot of that was based on the fact that the people that were elected and the people that won these campaigns were people who had previous experience in elected office, right? So that means that by the time you were running for Congress, you were more likely to win if you had served in the state legislature, if you had served in the city council, if you have been a mayor. They even count school boards. So anything where you had to run for office, win a seat, made you more likely to then win your seat in the United States House of Representatives or the Senate. However, as I started paying attention to the world around us in the last 10 to 20 years, I started to kind of question this old adage, right? And this led myself, along with a team of graduate students and now undergrads here at UNC, to say, is this still the case, right? Is it still the case that people who have experience, right, who have been serving the public, who have kind of committed themselves to public service, are they still more likely to be the people serving in the US Congress? And here I'm going to give you kind of a quick example of this, looking at the state of Connecticut. And this is in 2018, right before that election, so I think at the end of 2017 actually, Elizabeth Etsy here said that she was not going to run for re-election. She was not going to seek her seat for the next time. So she had been a 3-term incumbent. She was going to quit after those 9 years that she had served in the US Congress. So immediately, Mary Glassman, who was the former first selectman in Connecticut, which is essentially a mayor-like position there in Connecticut, put her name in the hat. And she had the backing of a lot of other Democrats throughout the district, and it was sort of expected that this would be her seat. This very much follows the old kind of political science story, that someone who's served a lot, who has all this experience, would run and would win. Well, long and behold, something that we're observing elsewhere, someone who had never really been in the public service sphere locally or in the state decides to also put her name into the hat, and that's Jehana Hayes. Now, I'm not going to say that Jehana Hayes isn't a good candidate, right? She's a teacher. She no doubt is a community service member, right? But she had never served with the intention of being in public service, right? So a really different type of background compared to Mary Glassman. Well, as it matches my story, you don't have to guess, but Jehana Hayes wins this primary election, becomes the Democratic nominee. She then faces another experienced candidate in Manny Santos, a Republican, in the general election. She wins that seat too, right? And this is what led us to ask, is there still an advantage to having past public service experience in winning elections? Okay, so as I sort of already hinted at, that there was formerly in political science thought to be this experience advantage. And part of that was that a lot of the amateurs who were winning, in fact, there's a great political science book called like Athletes, Astronauts, and Actors, right? Were those kinds of people. People who didn't have past public service experience were sort of known in other ways, right? They were known because they were Bill Bradley, right? Or they were known because they were an astronaut. And those people did well, but a lot of them were just kind of hopeless candidates that felt like it'd be fun to run for office, you know, let me just get my name on the ballot and we'll see what happens. So they were never really credible. All that being said, even that past literature that suggested this experience said that those people who had served before, right, did 7 to 10 percentage points better in general elections. Okay, so why might have that been the case, right? So the first thing I want to say is that the reason that people who had served before, right, in a state legislature or a city council typically perform better is because they're good at it, right? And that's what that previous experience does for you. It shows you that you know how to fundraise. It shows you that you have networks, that you are part of a Rotary club more than likely, right? And you can reach out to people and ask for their support, ask for their help, use them to help you figure out the best strategies to win office. And that's precisely why these people did very well. They also had other characteristics, valence characteristics, like competency, honesty, integrity, that sort of have been vetted at those lower levels when they were running for office, right? Things that might be thought of as a scandal or unnecessary baggage were already exposed much earlier before they were running for the US Congress. Okay, but here's the puzzle, right? And this is what my team and I sort of discovered in going back and looking. And no surprise, like a lot of this got attention, and we wrote some sort of popular articles back in 2016 when Donald Trump became president the first time, because he is sort of the antithesis, or he is what it means to be an inexperienced candidate, right? Who now won the presidency twice. And so here again, just looking at the United States Congress, what I'm trying to show here, the figure on the left going back to 1980 to 2020 is showing the percent of newly elected members of Congress with that prior experience in elective office, or without that prior experience in elective office. And so what you can see is, like in any freshman class, there might be about 30% back in 1980, but then here, post-2010, there's sort of a massive increase in the number of people entering the US Congress without that previous public service experience. Then we can also say over time, as that accumulates, right, as more and more members have come to Congress without previous experience, we now have sort of the largest cohort in recent history of people serving in the United States Congress that did not have previous legislative experience, previous experience running for office, etc. Okay, so I won't bore you with this slide, but this is the data that I use to answer these questions. So this is the little bit where I'm going to get kind of boring in political science for a moment to say, like, how can we measure whether or not you are penalized, or if there is no longer a penalty is maybe the right way to say that, for being inexperienced and winning an election and getting to Congress. So ideally what we want to do is sort of compare those amateurs, those people who have never had experience, to people who have had experience. Now, the problem with that is, as I said, a lot of the amateurs who run for Congress are real amateurs, right? And what I mean by that is they're hopeless. They have no chance of winning. So we don't really care about those. So what I'm going to do is kind of a neat analytical test that I'm able to take comparisons of people who ran as experienced candidates and people who ran as amateur candidates, and sort of say, let's find those who ran really close races, right? Who just barely won, amateurs who just barely won, and also experienced candidates who just barely won. And why that matters is what I can do with that, and this is going to be the figure you're seeing here on the left, is I can say in the primary election, if you had an amateur candidate, right, and you had an experienced candidate, and if one of those candidates just barely wins, which is the line in the middle there, so it's like the line in the middle is 0, so you won your race by 0, which doesn't happen, right, but you could win by 2 votes, and you get as close to that line kind of as you can get, right? And what we can do then is say, for those amateurs who won the primary election by just a little bit, and those experienced candidates who won the primary election by just a little bit, right? So very close elections, what's going to happen in the general election following that? And all it is to say, what I'm showing here with the data is that from 1980 to 1999, there was really a penalty paid for being an amateur candidate. Meaning, if your party elected an amateur candidate in the primary and they went on to the general, they were likely to lose. So you were making a bad choice for your political party, right? They weren't going to actually win this seat in Congress. Fast forward to today, so the year 2000 to 2020 is what these data are showing, there's no penalty at all. So if you are a Republican or if you are a Democrat and you are running an amateur candidate in your congressional district in the primary, regardless of if you pick the experienced candidate, the experienced Republican, let's say, or if you pick the amateur Republican, the person who's never held office, right, has never been committed to public service in the past, it doesn't matter anymore because they go to the general election and they win. And there's lots of things we can say about that, right? We could talk about gerrymandering as maybe a reason for that. We could talk about fundraising. We could talk about who's turning out and voting. We could talk about what the electorate is looking for in its candidates for office or the kind of rhetoric that's enticing us, right? I'm happy to talk more about all those things. But the point I want to make here is that no longer does the American electorate reward people with this past service. And that's obviously going to change the types of people going into Congress and likely how they're engaging with and working with or not working with the other members serving in the House of Representatives or the Senate. So the other two things I want to kind of draw your attention to here are what this has meant for fundraising in particular. So how fundraising might be a part of this story, right? So I mentioned gerrymandering, I mentioned a whole bunch of other things, but I think fundraising is particularly interesting to look at. And here I'm going to do the same thing and just show you data from 1980 to 1999. And here, what I want to say is that, again, nominating that amateur in that primary does actually decrease your party's fundraising in the general election, right? So once you nominated during this older time period, 80 to 99, and you put an amateur on the general election ticket, there's less enthusiasm to raise money for that person, which of course matches with the earlier data I showed you where they don't do as well, right? Because they didn't raise as much money. Okay, again, we move to today and we don't see that penalty anymore, right? So again, those amateur candidates are just as successful at raising the money they need to win. And to back up, this is why like that old kind of story in political science no longer matters, right? Because again, it used to be that being an experienced candidate meant that you had networks. It meant that you had people on your Rolodex that you could go to and say, I'm running for office, I really need you to pitch in $100, I really need you to pitch in $1,000. That doesn't matter anymore, and a big part of that dates back to the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United in 2010, right? And so what I call this in the book that I'm writing is a democratization of campaign finance, right? Campaign fundraising. And so now that we have so much fundraising coming from social media, we have different organizations on the Republican side and on the Democratic side that make it really simple for anyone to make small dollar donations to campaigns across the country, not just your local campaign. We have Win Red on the Republican side and we have Act Blue on the Democratic side. What that's meant is everyone from all over can get involved in sending money to campaigns, right? In a way that didn't used to be the case, right? It used to be that, again, you were really raising money locally. You were raising money from other people really invested in your own community. So sort of just to kind of show you some of these data, I can talk to you about out-of-district contributions, out-of-state contributions, and also just those small dollar donations. And here, essentially, what I want you to take away is there's no big difference between amateur candidates raising these monies and experienced candidates raising these monies. In fact, for both out-of-district contributions and out-of-state contributions, amateur candidates are raising more money, right, than their experienced candidates in those ways. Okay, so all that makes sense with the story that I told you, right? So if you go back to our Mary Glassman and Johanna Hayes example, when Johanna Hayes was raising her money for her candidacy in Connecticut as an inexperienced candidate, she raised most all of her money, a majority of her money, from outside of the district, right? And she actually used that as a, look, I'm inspiring people from all over the country, right? People want me to win, they want me to be in the United States Congress. Whereas Mary Glassman said, you know, her reliance on out-of-state money indicates that she does not have support from here. And there's truth in both of those things, right? There's truth in that, yes, Johanna Hayes, as this inexperienced candidate, is probably getting support from people who are interested in her candidacy for other reasons. Whereas Mary Glassman is saying, I can't get that kind of support, I'm getting local support, and isn't that what should matter in representation in the United States Congress, right? So where that then goes is this building into what I call valence characteristics, right? And what we find here is pretty interesting too, and this speaks to, I think, why Johanna Hayes was so successful in raising money from outside the district, is a lot of the work, and I won't go into too much detail here, what we're seeing is inexperienced Republican candidates are really getting support from people who care about their past occupations outside of public service, like I said earlier. So Republican amateurs who are doing really well right now tend to be military veterans, is something people gravitate toward a lot on the Republican side, and also business, right? And so those are the things that people are looking for in amateur Republican candidates and supporting their campaigns from around the country, right? Whereas on the Democratic side, gender and race seem to be the motivating factors for getting support from outside the district for amateur Democratic candidates, right? So do you check a descriptive box in something that the Democratic Party is saying we want more of in the United States Congress? And so just to kind of show that here too, this is whether or not during these different decades, people are being rewarded for that past experience. And you can see the interesting point here on the far right is Republican candidates not being rewarded for past experience. But again, if we dig into that, that's where we'll see they're being rewarded for being veterans or business owners. Those are the kinds of things that Republicans across the country are looking for. And then on the Democratic side, similar figure, the first block here is showing they're looking for female candidates and non-white candidates, right? So there's things beyond, my point being, there's things beyond that past service, right? Service in the state legislature, service on a city council, that seem to be what people are looking for. Now, again, what's interesting from a representation standpoint is it's not just about people in the district, right? Through social media, through the internet, people are exposed and able to contribute and help send people to Congress from all over the country. You are no longer limited to think about elections as being just within your own district, right? And that's really changed the makeup of Congress as we go forward. Okay, so maybe that's all boring to you. I think it's pretty exciting. But all that being said, it does leave this really big question there, like, so what, right? So you just told me that there's fewer people with past legislative experience serving in Congress. Like, and does that matter? Like, do we care, right? And my answer to you would be like, absolutely, we should care, right? Because what that is doing, and some other work that I'm working on collecting right now, is it seems to be exacerbating a lot of the things that we think of as negatives with regards to the United States Congress. A big one of those being polarization. Another big one of those being Congress's inability to pass a budget, right? That we're constantly dealing in continuous resolutions, that we're constantly worried about funding the government, that we're constantly worried about raising the debt limit. It turns out that when you bring people into Congress that don't have a lot of experience, that didn't have those same conversations in a state legislature, that didn't think about those kinds of trade-offs on a city council, never had to work with people across the aisle or from the other party, they're not super good at it, right? And that should be surprising, but as the numbers of inexperienced candidates have mounted in Congress, it's becoming an increasing problem. So these are just the inexperienced numbers coming into here, the 119th Congress, sworn in just recently. A few of them, of course, from North Carolina. But that's added to a long list of other inexperienced candidates that we're already seeing. So why does this matter, and what should we expect in this very Congress, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about inexperienced candidates, but we also know this is going to be exacerbated by the fact that we're dealing with what is obviously a very narrow majority for the Republican Party in this Congress, in both the House and the Senate. The Republican majority right now is 219. That will, of course, change when President Trump is inaugurated because of Stefanik and Waltz being in his administration. So the fact that the Republican Party is going to have a 2-vote majority, right? And we have people that we've elected now that are not great at compromise, in fact, have often come in with the intent of not compromising, right? And we can talk about that. That's going to be really problematic, especially given that we have a lot of big issues on the table with very unclear answers. So really quickly, when I look at the Congress and I look at these inexperienced members who are now serving, a lot of the problems that we see, or that I've kind of alluded to, are the fact that many of those inexperienced members came in campaigning on issues that said, we don't want to fix Washington, right? They've said, we're anti-establishment. They've said, populist kind of rhetoric, right? They're all about changing things, shaking things up. Very few of them are running on, I want to work across the aisle to find solutions, right? I want to be practical. I want to be pragmatic. That's not the kind of rhetoric that, again, is getting those small dollar donations and getting people contributing from around the country, right? What is fueling people to success is that anti-establishment rhetoric. Also, these inexperienced members don't know a whole lot about how Congress actually works. I mean, all freshman members do go to an orientation where they kind of learn the basics of how a bill becomes a law and how you vote in the House and how you vote in the Senate and whatnot. But again, what does it mean when your party says this is the way you're going to vote? Do I have to do that or not, right? Where is my flexibility? And again, inexperienced members seem not to sort of follow the old kind of practical, moderate, let's get things done, work across the aisle sort of standards that we definitely saw that we typically call the textbook Congress of the 1970s, 1980s, right? They also are just not good at sponsoring legislation. So if you elect an inexperienced member to Congress, they're not actually doing a lot of things, right? You will find them on the media a lot, right? They do like to have their name in the press. They like to appear on television, cable news networks in particular, but they don't sponsor as many bills as inexperienced members. We have metrics for how a bill moves through the process. They're not good at moving bills through the process. They bring less money home to their districts, right? So if you think about representation, and now that earmarks are back in Congress, getting things back home that your constituents can use, they're not very good at that, right? But they do, like I said, end up on the media a lot. Okay, so now I just have a bunch of slides that I don't think I have time to go into, but I'm happy to talk about them. I will end by talking a little bit about that narrow majority, right? Which becomes even harder to navigate with all these inexperienced members. So the fact that Speaker Johnson has this 2-vote Republican, margin in the House of Representatives is going to be incredibly challenging for him on some pretty big issues. So we already watched the funding of the government debate the end of December, right, before they recessed for the Christmas holiday. And we saw major Republican fissures then. That's only gotten worse as the majority has gotten smaller moving into this next Congress, right? So we're gonna likely see another fight over the debt ceiling. Government funding that was passed in that continuing resolution in December expires in March. So all of those same issues are gonna be coming up. I'm sure you've heard talk of a reconciliation bill. They're even trying to fight over what should be in the reconciliation bill and if there should be one of them or 2 of them, right? This doesn't bode well, once again, for a Congress that is trying to get things done and has a lot to do. Now, I should pause there because it's certainly the case that the Congress was designed not to move quickly, right? We can go back to the American founding, we can go back to James Madison in particular, Federalist 10, other Federalist papers that really talk about Congress being a place that things should be slowed down, right? We didn't want to have drastic changes all the time like a monarchy under King George. And that's part of the reason we have the bicameral legislature that we do, in particular the United States Senate. That being said, there's some basic things that Congress should be doing, right? And passing a budget is one of them. Funding the government is one of them. And those are the kinds of things that have not been getting done in recent Congresses of the past, right? And I think a big part of that is these inexperienced members. Just to say again, immigration, energy, defense is a part of that too. I could go on, but I'll end right here by saying Congress is not popular, right? It's the least liked branch, which is a hard place to be because none of them are particularly liked at this moment in our nation's history. But I think we're doing it a disservice in some ways by electing the people we're electing by no fault of our own, right? But the system of money that has been broken, the fact that we no longer have these one-to-one connections between constituents and their members. And we should really spend some hard time thinking about different types of reforms that might be helpful to getting our Congress sort of back on its feet and doing the work that makes sure that we're finding practical, pragmatic solutions to some of the biggest problems facing us today. So happy to take any questions. Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Start here in the back. How about you, Lorenzo?
Yeah, I probably don't need a mic.
Great.
Are there any countries you feel have a more successful model? And just by reference, I think in the UK, funding is determined. If you get a certain number of signatures, you get the same amount of money, and then you compete equally. That eliminates that huge imbalance. So,
yeah, no, I think that the UK system is an interesting one here. Now, that would take a major constitutional change for us to move to something more parliamentarian, as opposed to the system that we use today, like single-member districts and whatnot. But from a money perspective, that's a huge advantage, in my mind, that that country has, given that money is really just a public good that is distributed according to the number of commitments or signatures that you have, right? That's going to be challenging, though, given that 2010 decision in Citizens United that really just opened up floodgates and said money does equal speech, and we can't really limit it in the spending way that we kind of want to, perhaps. Yeah, it's a great question. Sorry, I think Tim is calling up you.
Sorry, here.
One question. Is it true that is the same change going on in the staffs? The original knowledge is that the staffs are fairly constant and they have the keepers of the culture and blah, 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 blah. So are the staff also subject to the same kind of stuff?
This is a great question, and I'm so excited you asked it because I'm starting to study this, right? Because I think the short answer is the same change is happening in the staffs, right? And it's mostly motivated, once again, by the inexperienced members that are coming in and not knowing how to create a staff in Washington, right? So I can just give you some anecdotal evidence, but a lot of the inexperienced members that have been started in the 118th, I don't have the data on the 119th yet, went and hired their campaign manager as their legislative director. Now, running a campaign is incredibly different than running a Hill office, right? And figuring out how to pass a bill is very different than fundraising or putting together an ad campaign. And so the people that have done that, who have made, they are mistakes in the sense that they don't usually end up working out well, their offices are suffering some of those consequences, which they don't know how to legislate then, because they don't have the right people there. So how staff has been accumulated in these inexperienced offices does seem to be incredibly different. And I do think that's a very much like a part of the problem, right, is that they don't know how to put together the right staff. I mean, they can learn, and I think they are. We're seeing some updating, and that's one of the interesting things about this project, is that as more time goes by, I'm able to sort of test some more of those things, right? So maybe their staff, their first 2 years was terrible, but maybe they learned and hired some better people, right? And so as more Congresses go by, I'm able to look at that more. But that's a great question.
So, basically, since the beginning of time, the outcumbents, as I like to call those who are the challengers, have always tried to talk about how awful things are with the incumbent, and they can't be trusted, and often, the country's going to hell, all that. Today, though, with technology that we should be celebrating with social media, it seems to me to be the enemy. And when I think about ultimately, it's algorithms. We understand that really are queuing all of us up to hear only the worst things that match up with what we already believe. How much is that a factor of our extreme polarization? And do you see a remedy?
No, I think it's a huge factor, right? And I'm just mentioning it in this brief talk here today as it relates to fundraising, right? Because those same algorithms that you're talking about on social media are directing people to the right candidates and the right fundraising accounts, and this person's likely to contribute to this candidate out in California because they share similar, all that is part of a social media algorithm, right? And it definitely matters in fundraising, but it's going to matter in other things too, because what you're getting is so determined by what you already believe and are predisposed to. I do not have a solution to social media other than I am off of social media. I have gotten rid of all social media. I tell my children not to touch social media, but it's a massive collective action problem, right? And I don't have a clear solution at this moment, but it definitely is contributing per political science literature to the polarization we see in the electorate. And we already sort of know that Congress is polarized. So, whether or not it contributes to that, that already exists, right? So I think it's a huge problem.
So we'll get you.
Hey, you touched on the money problems. I know it's a big topic, so you can expand on anything that you think is interesting. But are there numbers correlated with money and winning that you've studied in your statistics?
Yeah, so I mean, money wins. And that's pretty clear across all congressional elections. It's also pretty clear in state legislative elections. And this is why I think focusing on who's getting the money is so interesting. It very much, again, used to be the case that the better fundraisers were the people who had served in state legislatures. They were the people who were connected in the community, had networks, had lived in a place a long time, did probably join Rotary clubs, right? We're really like stalwarts in the local community. And that's definitely changed. I mean, we see inexperienced candidates coming in from outside the district even, moving last minute, even some incumbents. You can think about Laura Goldberg in Colorado, right? She switched her congressional district, moved her house because she thought she'd lose there, decided to run somewhere else. And this kind of behavior is very common. And it doesn't matter if that happens because money is what matters, right? So if you can raise the money, and my point here is you can raise the money, right? You can raise the money because social media is going to help you raise the money. The parties are going to help you raise the money, not from your congressional district, not because you're well known in Chapel Hill, Durham, and Hillsborough. You're going to raise the money because the Democratic Party is going to send your name out across the country saying, we need you to win this election, help elect this Democrat. Help elect this Republican, and money comes from all over. So it really is only about the money, and that's problematic.
Is it like a certain percentage, like if you win the money battle, it's 70% victory or anything like that?
I mean, it's almost like 1-to-1. If you win the money battle, you win the election. So it's not perfect, so I'm not gonna put a percentage on it, but it's essentially, if you win the money battle, you're winning like 90% of the time. And those other 10% tend to be things like a scandal was revealed or something else happened that, it's.
What do you think about term limits?
Term limits, yeah, it's a great question, and one that I actually talked to someone else here about recently. It's certainly one of the things when people talk about reforming Congress that usually is mentioned. I tend to be hesitant about it. For one of the biggest reasons being, like, what are the consequences then for your behavior, right? Meaning that if we're gonna say that you can only serve in Congress for 2 terms, so it'd be 4 years in the House, right? If you can only do that, what incentivizes your public, your good provision, right? Why would you be motivated to pass good laws, compromise, work together? And that's usually what people come back with. I've started to think about that a little bit differently, given some of this research that I've done on inexperienced candidates, right? Maybe term limits are worth exploring in the new Congress, right? With the idea being, well, if people don't care about those things anyway, right? At least we could get some new people and new ideas into the Congress. But in general, I'm still pretty hesitant to endorse something like term limits as a solution because I don't see how it fixes a lot of the problems that we're seeing today, right? What about giving someone a term limit? It's going to make them more willing to compromise, going to make them more willing to think about what's best for the country as opposed to what's best for their pocketbook or something like that. But it's something that's always talked about. It's a good question. Yeah? Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Thanks very much. This is fascinating. A couple of questions. When you think about the psyche of the American people and what's occurred, and the number of people who are being elected that are inexperienced, and yet you've got one party who's saying, oh, we're really looking for business people, right? And my assumption would be most of us who have hired individuals, we look for experience, right? What are the aptitudes, your experience, and so on? That seems to have evaporated. So any insights in terms of what's happening with the American psyche, and could it be a lot of the algorithms that are being, adjusted for social media? And then what are the risks that we have as a result of this? Have you all examined that? So if you wouldn't mind 2 questions.
Yeah, no, those are great, and they go well, they hang well together. So they're big questions, and I've started to get at the first one a little bit with some experimental work and surveys of the American electorate that I'm doing. And what we're seeing goes back to that sort of, that rhetoric that I was sort of briefly mentioning. There's something the American electorate currently really likes about the idea of anti-establishment, fixing something, which is often where business comes in. Like people like, I work for Mitt Romney, people like the fact that he took companies that were failing and fixed them, right? Do that in Washington, right? So that kind of mentality of a business person could solve these problems, right? Now, of course, business is not government. They're very different for a variety of reasons. And people, though, have an aptitude right now for liking that. Which all suggests this is not a unique American problem. I think it's something else that's really important to keep in mind. We're seeing sort of similar types of inexperienced success. We're seeing similar dissatisfaction with government in the UK, in Eastern Europe, in Germany, in France, certainly in South America. And so we're seeing the same kinds of things, but it seems to be that people are not happy with the government currently, right? Things are not getting done. You think back to this last election, people don't feel like there's enough order, but yet they're not seeing people giving them answers to those questions, right? And so when then you're feeling that, again, this is just what my survey is like kind of revealing, when you're feeling that, you're more likely to go for the rhetoric that suggests, I can fix it, right? Even if it's not true. And we often know it's not true because government takes a lot of people to work, right? It takes a lot of compromises. One person can't fix anything. But we gravitate toward that kind of rhetoric, right?
Solid.
Thank you. Really, really interesting conversation and presentation. My question to you is this. If you were to go back even further than your snapshot of 1980 to current, and look at the historic evolution of our country and sort of look at the foundation of our institutions having been challenged over generations, as far back as the 1860s, if you will, have there been other, if you will, instances in the cyclic kind of nature where there were inexperienced members elected to office, and are the consequences historically that we could look back on similar so that these observations can be validated? That's sort of question number one.
Okay.
And I have two also.
Okay.
And second,
I don't think I ever got to her second one, but go on.
and second, I guess, is the doom and gloom scenario with social media, the Citizens United Act in 2010, is money being more. Is that a tipping point? Are we in a global warming spiral right now?
Right. Yeah, no, those are great questions. So the historical one's really interesting. I mean, the obvious sort of like funny answer is the first Congress was really inexperienced, right? So I appreciate whoever laughed, thank you. So yeah, it's hard to go back and collect these data because there's actually not great data on occupation. So it's really easy to know if someone served in the past. It's less easy to figure out what they did. Right, so we could kind of code them dichotomously as like, yes, they were definitely a state legislator, or we can't find anything. They probably weren't, right? So we can start to do some of that, and we have, right? We just kind of started here and are on our way, moving backwards. But anecdotally, this is a unique moment. My hesitation is, other than like the very beginning of Congress, where everyone was a farmer or maybe a lawyer, right? Very different time, not a career politician world, because I think we want to distinguish kind of those things. Back to your term limit question. In the career politician world, the progressive era did see inexperienced candidates, and that also is an interesting moment in our history because it was the other moment where we saw as much polarization that we see today, right? So oftentimes people go, oh, we've never been more polarized. Go back and look at the 1920s, right? A very highly polarized era in our nation's history. And so I think what we can learn from that is a third party emerged, right? The Progressive Party, never officially a party, right? And so maybe that's part of the answer. Progressive movement was a movement that drew from both political parties, right? Kind of found a space for moderates that were feeling very much enchanted with the left and the right, as it was back then. So that could be something we could take away from that moment. But other than that, I think you're right with your second question that it's such a new world from that period of time, right? So how informative history can be when it didn't have social media, it didn't have the open fundraising that we have today, is really a challenge. And I don't have an answer for it yet, other than, again, I would get off social media. But I think we'll see. And hopefully the more we talk about it, I'm optimistic, the more attention we sort of shine on it, people might have these like aha moments, like, oh, we need to pay attention to this, right? We really need to think more collectively as a nation, like what we're doing and how we're exacerbating this problem.
Last one, so I'm sorry.
Okay. I've had some dealings with the Koch brothers from Kansas and their influence, which is phenomenal. I realize small dollars are there, but they have the organizations to put people in place. And really, aren't some of these inexperienced people more of a proxy for an ideal?
What do you mean by ideal? Like from?
No government or limited government interference and business. Getting back to the last great Republican president, that would be Bill Clinton, because he balanced the budget, did a lot of things, and he simplified it. He said, it's the economy, stupid.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good question. I'm trying to think. Potentially, yes, but what's different in my mind about some of these inexperienced members, regardless of where they're funded from, and yes, Koch money is a part of this, but mostly it's, again, small donations. It's about just people that are contributing to the success of these candidates, and they're not sort of those classic conservatives on the right in a way that they talk about reducing government spending, but they also spend money on other things, right? I mean, watch this reconciliation bill and any votes that happen on it. There will be these divides, and part of the reason they want to split it in two is they want to separate out the fiscal spending from the general fiscal spending, from the fiscal spending on immigration, right? And so they're willing to spend a lot of money if it involves deportation, wall building, border security, right? Which is not fiscally sound, right? And so to me, that's what's interesting about this new mold of inexperienced members, is they're lacking sort of a principled argument. And I think that's where we kind of fell apart from previous Congresses, because there were always, I mean, this is this little fun polarization figure I had in here, right? 1989 is up here in the upper left. And the point of this figure is Democrats are blue dots, Republicans are red dots, and you can sort of see there's some mixing in the middle, right? And then you read it like you read a book. And the point is, by 2011, down here on the far bottom right corner, there's complete separation between the two parties. And why that matters, and this is like so hard for my students to wrap their head around, right? Because for them, there's no such thing as a Democrat conservative, right? Like those things they can't even wrap their head around what that means. But that used to exist, and it was because they had principled arguments, right? And so they were able to go into a Congress, and they were able to say, I'm a fiscal conservative, but here's what I need for my district, or here's what I'm willing to compromise on to get the things that I need, to get you the things that you need. And now it's more about show horsemanship, right? And it's about claiming something, but in reality, maybe not practicing it. So it's much more convoluted. But thank you. I'm happy to talk more after. Thank you for your time.
I'm sure.
Sarah, thank you so much. Folks, have a good weekend. Please be careful of any inclement weather you may experience.
Thank you. I appreciate
Okay, great. Were you also having a hard time looking up the steps, or no? You're not a natural?